start off looking at some meeting participation reminders. One, the committee meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to give comment at 6:05. At around 7:15, we will take an online break. At 7:15, we'll take an online break, and at that time, there'll be no online discussion during the break. Guidelines today for our Zoom-only meeting is for chat box. Please introduce yourself and let us know who you are. We welcome you. Also, if you would like to give public comment, put that information in the chat. Committee members, outside of public comment, committee members will be the only ones sharing discussion, having discussion. Committee members, please raise your hand when you want to comment. The video is on for the duration of the meeting. Public members will be muted. This meeting is being recorded, and we have closed caption in effect for the entire meeting. For our agenda, I'll give a quick overview, and then it'll be followed by introductions. The introductions will start with the committee members and then have an introduction of staff. At 6:05, as I said, we'll have public comment. At 6:35, there will be a background given and premise for proposed allocations for the Climate Investment Plan funding forecast. And then there'll be some comments shared on the Climate Emergency Work Plan. And that's at 6:35. At 6:50, we will look at the first process for the first set of proposed allegations to city bureaus. At 7 o'clock, the discussion on projects proposed for the first set of allegations will be amongst committee members. 7:15, again, we'll take a 10-minute break. 7:25, we'll go back to discussion on projects proposed for the first set of allocations. 8:15, there will be an initial discussion on the process for the first set of allocations. And at 8:30, the meeting will close. I'm going to start with introducing committee members. Paul, I'll start with you.
Good evening, everyone. Paul Lumley, committee member.
Megan.
Hi, all. Megan Horst, she, her, co-chair.
Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member.
Robin.
Good evening, Robin Wang, committee member, he, him.
D'Angelo.
Good evening, D'Angelo Monin, committee member.
Faith.
Hi, everyone. Faith Graham, committee member, she, her pronouns.
Ranfis.
Good evening, Ranfis Giantino Viatoro, he, him, committee member.
Maria.
Hello, Maria Sippin, committee member, they or she pronouns.
All right, and Sam, I'll kick it off to you to start off with the introductions of staff.
Thank you. And I do know that Alicia, because I've been texting, Alicia Chapman is on the line with us via phone.
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't see her name, Sam. Yeah. Alicia, would you like to say hello, introduce yourself?
Maybe Chow. I think I'm thinking about the whole star 6, star 9, and I never know which one is it.
I think it's just star 6 toggle.
All right, we'll give her a chance to join online in a bit. Good evening, everyone. Sam Barrasso, he, him pronouns, program manager with the Portland Clean Energy Fund team. And I know we've got a range of our staff chiming in here, listening in, but I'll start with Katie, as she may be chiming in and presenting a bit today or sharing reflections. But Katie.
Hi, all. Katie Lister. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the PCEF team.
All right, that's it on our side for this evening, Tracy.
All right. So at this point, Sam, we're looking at a public comment. And for those who are interested, again, as I said, if you're interested in giving public comment, and that is, we're asking you to share no longer than 3 minutes, please. If you would like to comment, please put your comments in the chat. And Sam, do you have a list of names already available?
Yeah, Rachel, do you have the list available of folks that have signed up? I know I see a few people that have signed up, but want to pull up the full list and maybe at least because I know a couple of folks that are here. Yeah, Rachel, will you call them out in order just so they can kind of hear their order and know when to be ready?
Yes, and definitely let us know in the chat if we miss you, or if you didn't sign up in advance. I have, and forgive me for mispronunciations, Rocco DeBroat, Mirabai Collins, Eli Spevek, Christina Dirks, Brenna Bell, Micah Mescal, Yashar Vasev, Heather Kiesler-Forens, and Mercedes Elizalde. So if Rocco, if you're online.
Thank you. I was going to ask you, Rachel, to repeat those just in the order.
And I'll send them to you via chat, Tracy.
All right. Is Rocco here? Rachel, let's move on to the second person, please.
All right, Mirabai.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing this evening? First, I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration in investing in our community with additional PCEF funds. My name is Mirabai Collins. I'm speaking on behalf of Black Futures Farm, Black Food Sovereignty Coalition, and in solidarity with the larger food systems and sustainable agriculture community of Portland. I also come to this meeting in collaboration with a group of 20 and growing organizations that represent thousands of Portlanders, most of whom are disproportionately and negatively impacted by climate change and represent PCEF priority populations. I'm here to advocate for specific support of our sector from PCEF. So the work of regenerative agriculture ensures that communities most impacted by climate change have the essential food and food resources they need to thrive, and helps strengthen community connections by creating healthy open spaces that not only produce food, but also function as gathering places where healthy, nourished communities can exchange the ideas that will, when adequately funded, become the climate resilient strategies of the future. Not only are we improving the health of community members in this work, but regenerative agricultural practices reduce greenhouse gases, alleviate external pressures on existing food systems, prepare community members for self-sufficiency, and build the mutual support networks that frontline communities will need to meet the challenges of climate change. These goals are achievable, and they are central to the commitments of PCEF. I ask that you remember to invest in community-based nonprofits, in grassroots efforts to imagine and realize a cleaner, greener, more sustainable future for urban agriculture and food systems in Portland. The regenerative agriculture sector expands local food production, provides green jobs, builds soil, creates healthy communities, nourishes thriving food ecosystems, and cultivates the next generation of food systems leaders, all PCEF priorities. This work is essential to building climate resilience and needs the commitment of additional funding. We are asking for just 10% of the $540 million that PCEF has to allocate. So please invest, support, and deepen the commitment to regenerative and urban agriculture in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirabai. Now we have Eli.
Hello, my name is Eli Spivak. Thank you for your time and for Ronfi for requesting this additional meeting. I've long time served on Portland's Planning Commission, and I'm not going to speak about the proposal in front of you exactly, but I would like to speak about the importance of an empowered group that you have right there now, because you've been selected, you've been handpicked by City Council to provide them with thoughtful wisdom from your experience and from what you hear from the public as they make decisions on how to use PCEF resources. And I recognize you're also in kind of a tough spot here because you've been given very little time to do it. And a lot of the political piece of it has already been figured out, at least for the first year or two. So I'm hopeful that you rely on staff, as you already are, to call this meeting, and their expertise. You're at BPS is a great bureau for this. They've supported the Planning Commission for many years in this forum to give you a chances to hear from the public, to deliberate amongst yourselves, and then to formulate your recommendations in a really powerful and committed way to City Council. So although they ultimately get the last bite at the apple on all this stuff, there's always a political ramifications, and they have to act as the executive, right, to manage the bureaus and their budgets. Those are real responsibilities, but they picked you to make sure that they have the lens of the PCEF program in mind when they're making these decisions. And I hope that you find a way to communicate that to council in a respectful way. And in terms of what's on the table right now, the one thought I have is that if you have some bureau programs that are more aligned with PCEF's mission and some are less, then perhaps there's a way for those that are less aligned to commit 2 years instead of 5 and take that surplus to grow the other ones or something like that, so that City Council's hands are tied, maybe not for the full 5 years for some programs that you like to have a little more time to evaluate. So with that, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good opportunity to deliberate amongst yourselves.
Thank you, Eli. Next is Christina.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. And also thank you, committee members, for your commitment to prioritizing PCEF's investments in historically underserved by community investments, yet disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. My name is Christina Dirks. I am the Director of Policy and Planning at Home Forward. For folks that don't know us, Home Forward is the largest provider of affordable housing in both the city of Portland and in the state. We provide housing or ongoing rent assistance to more than 15,500 families in Multnomah County. All of our families that we serve are low income, and the vast majority are considered extremely low income, which means that their income is between 0 and 30% of the area median income. In the affordable housing industry, Home Forward is a national leader around environmental policy and safety. As a result of our work on radon and water quality in our housing, we see greenhouse reductions and climate resiliency as part of our mission to provide safe, healthy, and affordable housing. And over the last year, we provided comment on the draft climate investment plan, and we really appreciate the really thoughtful and intentional engagement that you all have done with the community to develop a really well thought out and intentional funding framework. Tonight, I want to just briefly comment on the request for increased funding from Portland Housing Bureau in the amount of $440 million for the preservation and energy improvements of existing affordable housing. We echo the need for this increased investment in the work that has immediate and tangible impacts to low-income individuals. Not only are these energy savings seen by low-income folks, but the health benefits are felt in the lived environment in people's homes. And we are also investing in energy upgrades to long-term community assets that prioritize affordability with regulatory oversight. So some accountability there. We also do know, though, that the need for this type of preservation work exceeds the requested $40 million. At Home Forward alone, we have identified $20 million in basic energy efficiency upgrades in 26 of our properties. And for this reason, Home Forward supports the Portland Housing Bureau's ask and would encourage the committee to consider an even deeper investment in the future. I also would like to put the idea out there that the committee may want to consider at a future date a direct allocation to Home Forward to engage in the carbon reduction preservation projects we have identified as a trusted jurisdictional partner that's under, various existing intergovernmental agreements with the city of Portland right now. And then finally, I just want to elevate one point that Michael Bonacore, the interim director of PHB, made at your last meeting. He stated that PHB committed its 5-year allotment of $60 million for clean energy in new and redeveloped regulated affordable housing in less than 1 year. And so, as you know, we are under a statewide housing production target of 36,000 homes per year set by the governor to address our housing crisis. And now is the time to make sure that the regulated affordable housing that we are building today in our city is going to contribute to overall carbon emission reductions and climate justice rather than further contributing to our climate crisis. And so we would also encourage the committee to consider an even deeper investment in the funds allocated to PHB for the work in new and redeveloped regulated affordable housing, as distinct from the pending PHB ask for existing preservation work in current affordable regulated housing. Thank you again for your time and your commitment to making Portland more resilient, healthy, and equitable.
Thank you, Christina. We'll now move on to Brenna.
Hi, thank you. My name is Brenna Bell. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Forest Climate Manager for 350 PDX. I'm also the co-facilitator of the Portland Shade Equity Coalition that has about 70 members, including membership from 30 groups that are focused on urban forests, arboriculture, climate resiliency, and community tree preservation. We started as a coalition after the 2021 heat dome and have been really focused on elevating the profile of urban forests as a climate justice solution. We're really grateful for the investment that PCEF has already made in the climate investment plan with $40 million for tree planting. But one of our key focuses has actually been the gap around maintaining existing trees, specifically street trees, which are public assets. As you may know, the fact that the street tree maintenance falls on adjacent landowners rather than the city is a key barrier to people in low-income neighborhoods, especially planting trees, because you never know what's going to happen to a tree, as we all have recently seen. And so we've been pushing for the past 2 years for the city to identify sources of funding for street tree maintenance. And this is not a new issue. As early as 1995, the city identified the need to find funding sources to take on street tree maintenance. And in starts and stops for the past, almost 30 years, it has been trying to do so. And today it might be the closest it's ever come, with this proposal from Portland Parks and Recreation for $100 million to go to street tree maintenance, to launching a program for the next 5 years. And I understand that this is a complicated moment for PCEF, with a lot of allocations going to the city rather than directly to the community groups that the fund was created to support. I'd also say that the city is really the only body that is going to be able to take on tree maintenance at the scale that it needs to make it free for all landowners, and that this would be a huge step in creating a more equitable urban forest. And so I strongly advocate that you support PPR's request for $100 million for at least 5 years, but please consider this an investment that could move forward in perpetuity in order to develop the capacity and the workforce that it will take to take on maintenance of street trees. Contractors need to know that there will be some certainty. So 5 years is really the minimum we can get. Portland Parks and Recreation is also looking at funding sources through their Sustainable Futures program, but that is moving very slowly. So my deep gratitude to PCEF for looking at this, and just strong support for moving this particular suggestion from Portland Parks and Recreation forward to create more equitable forests for all Portlanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenna. Next, we'll move on to Micah.
Thank you, committee members. My name is Micah Meskel. I'm the Assistant Director of Conservation for Portland Audubon. I've been involved with the PCEF Community Coalition since 2017, supporting my BIPOC allies that were leading the coalition and passing an initiative to create the program and defending it from industry-led attacks since then. I've followed the implementation and evolution of the program very closely, with a key interest in seeing it hold true to the initial goals of focused community climate benefits. I very much appreciate the grant committee's conversation at last week's meeting regarding the process and substance of the first set of proposed allocations of the PCEF surplus to city bureaus. And we agree with much of the sentiments expressed by the committee members around the alignment or misalignment of some of the allocations with PCEF's mission and the preference for a more deliberate process that allows the committee and community to play a role in the consideration of shaping these allocations. We also see value in the pragmatic approach that Commissioner Rubio, BPS, and PCEF staff and Bureau directors have undertaken to consider how these unexpected surplus dollars could be distributed swiftly towards climate resilient projects to ensure they remain intact amid a significant city budget deficit. Many of the investments reflect both popular and effective climate resilience programs that have significant public benefits. One project that I'd like to highlight is the allocation of the 5 years funding of creation of a street tree maintenance program, which Brenda just spoke to. It's a transformative step towards realizing a more equitable tree canopy across the city and has been a community-led priority for decades. Another allocation of note that we are very supportive of and overlaps greatly with PCEF's goals are the BES projects of watershed, stormwater, and green infrastructure and revegetation projects, all of which will reduce temperatures, increase air quality, reduce flood risk, and provide access to nature across the city. We hope you consider a few things for the discussion of this and future allocations of the budget surpluses. We're hoping that the grant committee considers bolstering the community response grant programs in RFP number 3 and future RFPs, as this is a core component of the initial community envisioned program that most directly serves the BIPOC and low income community members that this program was envisioned by and for. We hope you lead a process to help inform the implementation of the first allocation with opportunities to realign or course correct over time with bureaus. And we hope that you host a process to discuss and seek community feedback on how to shape future allocations that makes more space for new ideas and community-led initiatives. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Yashar.
Good evening. My name is Yashar Vasav. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the executive director at Friends of Trees. We're a community forestry nonprofit that is in our 35th year of operation, and we're approaching our 1 millionth tree or native shrub planted with community volunteers. I stand before you today to express our support for the proposed $100 million allocation to a tree maintenance program at Portland Parks and Recreation, an initiative that responds to the needs and concerns of many community members. This program holds the promise of not only enhancing the beauty of our surroundings, but also safeguarding our most vulnerable communities against the adverse impacts of extreme weather events, as recently witnessed in the devastating ice storm. Maintaining our urban canopy is not merely an aesthetic concern, it's a crucial component of our resilience against the unpredictable forces of nature. Trees act as natural buffers, absorbing excess water during heavy rainfall, mitigating flooding, and providing shade and cooling during extreme heat, such as the 2021 heat dome event. I urge the committee and government stakeholders to consider the integral role of community organizations and Portlanders in this initiative. By actively involving community organizations and individuals in tree maintenance efforts, we not only distribute the benefits of the program, but also foster a sense of ownership and pride across our neighborhoods. Community organizations can play a pivotal role in transforming young tree maintenance into valuable educational opportunities. For instance, young tree maintenance projects can serve as platforms for community education programs, enlightening residents about the ecological importance of trees, proper care techniques, and the broader impact of climate change on our local environment. Furthermore, the program could be leveraged for workforce development, creating jobs and skills building opportunities. By engaging residents in the maintenance process, we not only enhance the program's effectiveness, but also empower our community members with valuable skills and a sense of responsibility towards stewardship of our urban forest. This program is a forward-thinking investment. I'm excited by the long-term benefits and resilience that it brings to Portland, and I strongly urge the PCEF committee to support its implementation in a manner that also engages community organizations in support of BIPOC and low-income communities for the betterment of Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Heather.
Hey everybody, my name is Heather Keisler-Forens. I am the Executive Director of the Portland Fruit Tree Project, and I use she, her pronouns. Portland Fruit Tree Project, for people who are not familiar with us, is roughly 15 years old, and just last year we harvested over 13,000 pounds of urban produced fruit, cared for over 300 fruit trees, mapped over 700, and we broke the record for the world's longest charcuterie board. We do a lot of work with not that many resources, just like a lot of our peers in the regenerative agriculture bucket. So I'm here tonight to advocate for that additional funding to be dedicated to regenerative ag, since our bucket tends to be a little bit smaller. And our work is really hard and it's really different. It's slow because it takes a long time to build soil and to grow plants and for trees to establish and produce. The ongoing care is not as sexy. Planting new trees is very attractive to people. Planting a new orchard is really attractive to people, but the ongoing pruning and mulching is less so. So my other big ask is to consider contributing additional funding that's specific to general operations for regenerative ag projects. So much of the time we're asked to reframe our work in new ways to make it sound like new programming. So it's really trying to say that we're mulching and pruning in different ways a lot, when really we just need support in mulching and pruning. So if we want to keep the impact of regenerative agriculture, we are asking for an additional investment just in trusting all of these organizations that have existed for quite some time and have developed really strong relationships with each other and with the land. So thank you for holding the space for the conversations and trying to be the best possible stewards of funding that was intended to support equity-centered grassroots work.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Mercedes.
Hello, committee members. My name is Mercedes Elizalde. I am the Director of Advocacy at Latino Network. And I want to thank you all for the immense work that you're doing and the very quick timeline under which you're doing it. We recommend, as you continue to move forward to the proposals, to consider utilizing your existing criteria for evaluating what should be approved. It doesn't seem too much to ask that the bureaus are able to meet the same types of goals that you've asked your nonprofit organizations to meet. We also recommend limiting the 5-year ask to a 2-year ask. So that way the programs are able to be funded and start up. Again, nonprofit organizations all the time are asked to start ongoing services with 12 or 24 months worth of funding with far less overhead and staffing than city bureaus have. 2 years should be sufficient for them to get started. And then that also creates an opportunity for the committee to take in consideration, what is the ongoing process that you would like to have? How would you like to invite the bureaus to come and present? How much time should the bureaus actually be able to have? Some of them are sounding like they're doing incredible work and we're only able to give you 5 minutes of their time. I'm sure you'd love to hear more from them about what they're working on and how it aligns with community priorities. Also, starting next year, we're going to have districts. It's very likely that some of these initiatives will start to look different as they start to take on a district component, particularly things that are meant to be citywide investments. We've heard a lot about the trees, for example. The actual on-the-ground work can begin to look different once there are districts that are established, council members who want to see delivery of services in those districts by those district lines, and new community coalitions that will likely arise as a result of the districts. So setting aside funds to allow bureaus to come back in 2 years with fuller proposals and more time for discussion, more engagement with community so that you can really see how it's aligning with your other priorities, and then being able to allocate out the remaining 3 years of funds where they make sense, and also being able to invest in some new projects. Several committee members mentioned that there were things they would have liked to have heard from the bureaus about what they could do with their community, but they also weren't given that kind of time. So this would also give them an opportunity to bring proposals that have more intentional community partnership. This would also allow the committee to set aside funds if they want to see more funding in the CIP or more funding for capacity building for organizations, setting up a better timeline for when to review and how to review these proposals. Although this is being talked about as a single one-time instance based on tax collection, among other taxes that are also collecting revenue from folks who are making a lot of money, we're actually seeing that many of our tax revenues are overperforming. It's really hard to say whether or not this is actually a one-time jump or if there will continue to be jumps. And inevitably, there will be a downturn. Inevitably, we will move into a recession. And I think the most concerning thing would be is if the bureaus and community had to start competing for funds. And given the precedent that's attempting to be set here, that the bureaus get to decide what they want to fund rather than the committee and the bureaus working together in partnership, it seems that the community services would greatly lose out in a scenario where they had to compete directly with bureaus for limited funds, assuming we do hit a recession. Thank you again for all of the work that you are doing. I hope that you're able to take some time and be able to approve good work going forward, while also allowing for integrity and process, integrity and transparency, and really respecting the authority of this group to be vetting proposals. I know there's been a lot said about how well proposals are being vetted. I think more time is being asked for you all to spend more time with proposals, not less. And this is a good opportunity to be using that lens on both bureaus and community proposals as they're coming into you. Thank you again for your time and good luck with your work.
Thank you, Mercedes. Rachel, I just want to confirm that we don't have anyone else for public comment.
Not that I'm aware of, Tracy.
All right, before we move on to the next agenda item, Ramfis and Megan, as co-chairs, would you like to respond to the public comment?
Ramfis, you didn't unmute, so do you want me to go first?
You go first, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And I did want to say a few things and would love to hear Ramfis or other folks too. Just, last meeting we heard from a handful of people and we've gotten a bunch of letters and we heard from more. So I did request time on the agenda to be able to say something back to all of our community members that are taking a lot of effort to follow this complicated process and weigh in and share their really thoughtful insights and help us. I see our role as a committee. I think I share this with committee members, as our role is as a conduit for community to do the best we can to be an advisory board and make recommendations, thoughtful ones, to City Council. That's what's written in code and how we've acted, and to maintain to the best of our ability the integrity of the fund as it was imagined by the people who advocated for it and as it exists in the city code. So as we bring lots of expertise, as pointed out, that I hope we can all bring tonight to the conversation. So overall, I just want to appreciate people making the effort to be here, the organizations to watch the process, offer their concerns, their support, their suggestions. I wish I had a nice synthesis of all the feedback because it really ranged. Some are more directed at this round of decisions we're being asked to make. Some are concerns raised about the inequitable processes expected from CBOs versus city agencies. Others are about changing the RFP process. Others are about investing in PCEF staff. Some are about increasing funding caps for specific funding areas and for individual projects. Some are about altering the specifics of strategic programs like the affordable housing ones. So while a lot of those are super worthwhile conversations, today we're focusing on the city funding one. And I asked my committee members, though, to keep in mind that as we deliberate on the city funding proposal question, that we have an opportunity to make a broader set of recommendations, and they may be about bolstering funding for community RFPs or bolstering funding for our original CIP, making changes to strategic programs to fill some of the gaps. I was glad to hear of some community support for some of the specifics like the housing and tree funds. I'm a broken record on this, but as the rep for RAGI, Renewable Agriculture and Green Infrastructure, on this committee, I'm of course especially moved by all the advocacy for regenerative ag, which has received very small amounts of money to date. So I'll continue to keep trying to do my internal advocacy for that. We didn't see anything coming from city bureaus in this package. I hope we see more in the future. And I will tell all the regenerative ag orgs that are commenting and other community-based orgs about the RFP caps is please submit high quality applications to our RFP 3, which is out right now, because the best way we can know what to fund is to see your applications, high quality ones. And tonight and in ongoing deliberations, we can raise the cap on those funding amounts if we see community demand, interest, and capacity to implement high quality projects. So so I'm just urging you all that that's one way we'll see that. I also will be urging staff as we go on to revisit our RFP processes. It sounds like there's some streamlining needed, maybe some adjustments to enable operations work happening in our orgs. So I think that's another conversation we ought to be having, probably not tonight, but in the future. And last, just to my fellow committee members, I think we're being called on by our public to really vet these proposals, both in their specific individual ones, but also holistically thinking about the precedent we're setting. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do, as some of our commenters said, to use PCEF money in this time of deep budget cuts to transform how city work. But I think we have to be really careful about the precedent we're setting about how we do that. And I'll call for better processes going forward, slower, more deliberate processes. So that's a lot, sorry. I'll stop now.
Ramfis?
Thanks, Tracy. I'll just be brief and, one, just want to thank everyone who took the time to provide written testimony and showed up, between 6 and 8 to provide public testimony. It just demonstrates how much people really care about the program and about the mission of PCEF and what's in the city code. What's also additionally clear is just the hopes and aspirations that folks have for what the city can do and do better, and how we can do better with how we partner with community organizations. Like, it's pretty clear many groups have experienced harm with how it has either partnered or not partnered with the city, or how it's felt excluded. That's pretty clear in the comments. And I think it's also reflective of how much more we can do better, and just the hope of what PCEF can bring to the conversation. I'll just conclude and just saying, I think this is not going to be a perfect process. I think, I think the best that we can do is use our best judgment and make a well-balanced approach for making a decision. I think any opportunity that we can to both help the city, but also balance the needs of community, we will do the best that we can in our judgment there. And I will be leaning on committee members and continue to lean on the comments provided by many stakeholders. It's not going to be easy, but I'll just end there. I think I appreciate everyone's comments. They've been really helpful thus far, and think how we can think about next steps.
Thank you, Macon and Ramfis. And we'll be moving on to the next section, which is background and premise for proposed allocations. But we do have a committee member that is now online as opposed to the phone. Alicia, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I was in the car, but I appreciate the discussion and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
All right, background and context, Sam.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for everyone joining us this evening. Okay, I think, as we go through this, I wanted to lay some content that for some committee members will be some of the materials you've seen last week, but in reflecting on our meeting last week, I really wanted to kind of provide a little bit more of an arc around how we've gotten here today. And I'll just acknowledge that Donnie Oliveira, BPS director, is going to be giving part of this, and he won't be on with us until 7. So we may have to skip that when we get there, depending on time. So one, just to name, this is, and maybe we'll get to, I want to just acknowledge everything, certainly that I've heard from committee members, Megan, Ramfis last week, as well as commenters. This is not a good process. This is imperfect, and yet I think it's important to give context on why we're here, how and what does that mean. So one, as we've grown, as the scale of what PCEF is within the city has grown, we've made adjustments to recognize and acknowledge that as part of implementing PCEF, we need to create more flexibility, think about different ways to do it. And a lot of that ultimately resulted in this climate investment plan that City Council adopted in September of 2023. It reflected an evolution in its own right of the way that we've done our work, but core to the development of this climate investment plan over a period of 9 months, and then the work with others over 2 months to get it through council, it materialized in allocating and setting up $750 million over the next 5 years that is centered and focused on investing in projects that support the community. The plan includes 16 strategic programs, the tree maintenance reserve, and the community responsive grant program, of which we have our 3rd community responsive grant solicitation out right now. And that program is exclusively designed to invest in community-based organizations. I want to start with acknowledging that even within this plan, the vast majority of our staff today are focused on implementing this plan. That is what our everyday is focused on. And yet, there's a recognition that we need to continue as staff to continue to grow to support this work and this work here. And so I just wanted to name that because this plan from the very outset and the very focus, and for folks that went through that journey with us, has always centered the community, and we pulled every project we could make sense of and balanced it within this next 5 years. And we expect over this next 5 years to learn a tremendous amount of what is working well, what isn't working well, where do we need to make adjustments to the plan itself in order to acknowledge where we may need to make shifts. And so we are just getting underway. Our community responsive grants, our third round is going to be closing in 2 weeks. And we're excited about this. I think for folks that have tracked, that have engaged in that have showed up to our office hours, I want to acknowledge that our dedication, our commitment to this has not changed, and it is where it is the bread and butter of our work. And yet, at the same time, as we passed this at City Council in September 2023, just a little bit afterwards, you all know that, as part of reevaluating, looking at the fund, city economists teased out that we were going to have a substantially greater amount of funding available over this next 5-year period. Give me a second. And so as part of that, I think the context in which that comes into is the fact that we are actively implementing the climate investment plan, which was just passed a month earlier, while we've got a substantial influx of additional resources. And as folks recall, from some of the comments we received during the development of that plan, we did receive a range of city bureau proposals, but that centering and that focus was really squarely on where is that strong alignment with direct community benefits, community priorities, community-driven priorities, recognizing that there's going to be a spectrum of how every, projects that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions are going to serve the community. And we can get into it and articulate when we're talking about direct benefits to households versus more aggregate or neighborhood-wide benefits to a particular community. But this influx of additional resources certainly posed both a benefit and then a challenge from an implementation perspective, given just the work that we had just undergone in terms of soliciting input, feedback, and working with the community over a period of nine months. And so despite that influx of resources, I think I want to just acknowledge, and this is an important point to acknowledge, our climate investment need is high. It is substantially large. It is larger than PCEF resources will afford us. And so the balancing act here has always been, what is the need for investments that we need to make to become a climate resilient community, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to become healthier as a community and support our underserved communities. And at the same end, what is the capacity to do so? Where does that capacity exist now? And how do we move forward to where we are today to what is ultimately a generation of work carrying us all the way out through 2050 and beyond? And what does that trajectory look like? And so as folks can appreciate, that influx of resources has to certainly, there's some quick thinking on what does it mean given the effort we've just gone through, the evaluations, the considerations we've gone through. And so I'm not going to read through the slide, but I think what I've shared before here is that, I think the beauty in many ways of where we are today here as a region, as a city, as a community, is that we are the first city in the US to develop a climate action plan, starting with our global warming reduction strategy in 1993. We have been at this consistently for well over 30 years, nearing on 40 years now. And as part of that, we're one of the key elements was the development of the 2022 Climate Emergency Work Plan, which our climate team developed. This work plan is a city work plan. It is city directed. It is about what is the city going to commit to, going to be needing to do in order to reduce its emissions over the next few years. As part of that work plan, there's always been a distinction of what is the city doing and PCEF and its support for community. But I want to acknowledge that there is a substantial amount of work that went into that work plan. And that's really when we had this influx of resources, given that our initial sort of focus was starting with community, building out, bringing city partners into those conversations. We wanted to pivot and say, what do we have on the work plan that is certainly still focused on addressing greenhouse gas emissions and benefiting the community, but maybe from a different direction, certainly from the city. So the Climate Emergency Work Plan is centered on the city, and I want to be explicit about that document itself. And I'm not going to get into this, but it's just to give a little more context on the starting place for the conversations we had that ultimately led us to what is absolutely a very rushed process, but underpinnings of decades of climate work and work that is backed within the climate emergency work plan. And so the four key elements of the climate emergency work plan is about reducing carbon from the sectors that produce it, shown here in the graphic to the right. It is about reducing carbon from consumption of food, goods, and materials. It's about sequestering carbon in trees and green spaces and building Portlanders' resilience to the impacts of climate change, focusing on the most vulnerable. So that is our climate emergency work plan. And as we went through there, as you see, it's not something I wanted to walk through because it's got, action A, B, A, C, A, E, A, D. There's many actions in there that are focused on city agencies and what city agencies will do. And that was our starting place for saying, now that we've got these additional resources, and recognizing that we're going to need to give the climate investment plan itself that we just recently adopted the space to be implemented, where do we need to look to where we have ready capacity to implement projects, as imperfect as that may be? And so I just want to acknowledge that was some of the starting place for the work. And so I'm going to skip this next slide here because I do want Director Oliveira to chime in and give some of this context here on the city budget context, because that overlap is important in terms of where we found ourselves in fall, the city budget shortfall. We can't deny the reality of that juxtaposition of us having significant resources and us heading into a city budget that is going to face severe cuts. And I think I want him to join us shortly and provide some of that context. But I want to keep moving so folks sort of have just the sequence for the timeline before we dig into the proposals themselves, which we'll go through this evening. We'll go through each of the proposals and really solicit that committee feedback and discussion. Here, and I'm messaging our director. Okay. All right. So just our committee meeting schedule. As folks know, leading up to the announcement of and timing was certainly very imperfect. Our city budget forecast, or actually PCEF fund forecast, we've met with committee members in small groups to do that initial heads up. This is what's happening. And that happened in December before we all went away for the holidays and got to see our families and spend time thinking about other things other than PCEF, hopefully. Well, then we've come back and we've met with committee members in small group meetings, and I spoke a little bit more about this. So this is coming quick, yes. And the last committee meeting, you all heard brief overviews from our bureau directors on the first set of proposals that are before you all that we're going to continue discussing this evening. I want to acknowledge that was a 3-hour meeting. It was a lengthy meeting, and yet we know we could have spent 3 hours on any one of those given projects. And so that is just to name the reality of the time we spent, and the reality that there's a lot more opportunity and room to dig in. Tonight, you all will be continuing to discuss that first set of proposed allocations. And as part of tracking our bureau budget decision-making process, given that there's interdependencies in this, our next meeting is this Friday, and that's continued discussion, ideally a decision on the first set of proposed allocations. And then discussion on the process for the second set of proposed allocations. We're hoping you all will start discussing that so we can get the ball moving, given that as things go, these things still inevitably move faster than we all like. And we want to make sure that you all are able to start discussing that, continue to discuss that. We have additional committee meetings on February 15th, where we anticipate you all continuing, and it may be a different process. And I think that's what you all need to be teasing out here. Discussing the second set of proposed allocations. And then we've got our February 28th meeting on the calendar, and then our March 21st meeting. So there's room to frame out, adjust those subsequent meetings, but at least I want to acknowledge where we are this evening as we continue to move forward, not only for obviously you all, but for members of the public as well. And then with that, I will pause, see if there are questions, because at this point, I'm going to hope our director will join us, and then we'll move into actually diving into each of the proposals and discussing those more at length.
Robin?
Yeah, hi, Sam. Thanks for sharing the timeline. Can you just highlight or clarify when we are expected to make a decision? Are we expected to make any decision today? It sounds like it's February 2nd where a decision or a vote.
Yeah, I mean, and this is I appreciate everyone responding to our doodle polls, one of which I inadvertently put a Sunday day on. But yes, it's not today. I think we expect you all have further discussion, and then we'll come back on Friday from 3 to 5 for members of the public. We'll get that out here shortly and expecting you all. And part of that is just tracking the budget timeline, and that budgets will be internal city budgets we do the following week. But Friday is when we'll come back, and we're hoping for more deliberation tonight, more deliberation Friday, and then ideally a decision Friday. And I will acknowledge, maybe as I'm saying that, we know we have our bureaus due. You will be getting answer. There's a firm deadline. You will be getting answers to questions that we followed up. We sent the questions to the bureaus late last week. You will be getting those tomorrow. So at least it will be a short period, but you'll be getting at least the answers we can provide by tomorrow. And we'll have those as heading prior to heading into your meeting on Friday.
Ramfis?
Thanks, Sam, for answering Robin's question. That's helpful. Not to, add a curveball to how you all have the agenda. It would be nice to do a sort of a temperature check. I know in the past we've discussed sort of a color code, green, yellow, red, or just get a temperature check on just the line items, but we could always save that for the following meeting for discussion. But it would be helpful to know where folks are already initially feeling pretty good at the current information, where folks are feeling yellow. They just need more of that information that we're expecting on tomorrow. So if possible, but I understand. I don't want to throw a curveball with the framework you got today.
I think Rufus, I think that's a great idea. I think what we have here is we want to ideally I know that you all are processing this in real time together, and I know folks have had a range of conversations on this. As we walk through, I think at the end, we've got time reserved at the end after we've walked through sort of each of the bureau's proposals and got a sense for some of the concerns coming up or some of the things you all really like, for that space for you all to talk generally more broadly as a committee around what feelings are and where folks are at. So that may be a good point for it towards the end of the meeting.
Megan?
Yeah, I agree with the temperature check, because it doesn't seem fruitful with our limited time to spend a lot of time on things we're all already in agreement on. So if we can move that. But a question, Sam, doing the math, these total is 384 million. I heard you say we have 540. So that leaves, if we were to choose to recommend the full package, that actually only a lot of money for me personally, but only leaves 156 million. And when we're talking about perhaps wanting more funds for the CIP, as we already passed it per comments made and et cetera, I'm wondering about even the capacity for a second set of proposed allocations. Like, I worry that we don't have enough to do our CIP well if we keep just adding more. Do you understand my question?
It's no, loud and clear, Megan. I think it is in many ways. I feel like there's one, it's maybe an open call that if folks are seeking opportunities, we've got a lot of recruitments coming out in the near bit, and that has been equally a fundamental concern from the very get-go, that the scale of the CIP was substantial, and we are actively, and I welcome anyone to join us. We are actively working on that as much as we can, and at the same end, I think there is a reality of the scale of an influx of additional resources. There's always a trade-off. As much as we want to move funding and funding at the scales that we'd like and do smaller community-based organizations, there's a trade-off of how do we balance the scale of funding we need to move with the amount of funding we need to move given the staff capacity we have. And I think that is one element that city projects do afford us in terms of there's existing city infrastructure, existing city staff capacity, not entirely. Some city projects, they will need a higher up to implement those. But there is an existing city infrastructure there that can carry some of the load here, given that there's constraints, and those constraints are real, whether we're talking the city in many regards, whether we're talking externally in our nonprofit community. And so those constraints are very much real and present as we evaluated what does it mean to move the scale of funding.
Paul?
Thank you. Something we're on the part of the agenda where we can talk about process, but I am very concerned about allocating 5 years of funding with such little information we have and the way information has changed just over the last 5 years. So a few years from now, it could be a whole new set of circumstances. So my recommendation is that we not approve funding beyond a 2-year time limit, with the exception that some of these proposals are so closely aligned with PCEF, it might make sense for us to make an exception and fund them for the full 5-year proposal. The second set of allocations, which we'll take up later, if the city's willing to consider the community engagement we've had these last few meetings, they might want to change some of their proposals. I heard some strong interest for regenerative agriculture. There might be some other things out there. But if the city is willing to keep an open mind on the second set of allocation, that might be more helpful. And also, when we get to the conversation about individual projects, what are the implications if we say there's this set of projects we do not recommend for funding? How will that be received by the city? Because I do think there's some significant problems with some of these. Thank you.
So maybe if you don't, I'm tracking time. I'd love to move through the next slide to maybe Paul, because it'll speak to just a little bit of that. And there's more nuance. There's always nuance, right? But it maybe will give a little bit more. Okay, where do we, where do we go from here in terms of these meetings, in terms of adjusting the proposals, and I think there is a back and forth there on the. I think we can talk through the nature of which proposals can work and which may not under a 5 or a 2-year scenario. So maybe I'm just gonna start, we gave the context here, and I'm gonna keep us moving forward on the leveraging we start with the climate emergency work plan. It is a vetted document that went through a process with the city, and we looked through other bureau plans and strategic and capital investment plans that also identify other opportunities. The bureau submitted projects, we shortlisted them. We ultimately reviewed these with the city budget office to ensure alignment, understand which of those play, what are those impacts, particularly as we move forward through the budget process. And now we're here with you all. When we did go through this methodology, I want to start with, we did look at every project being and resulting in meaningful emissions reductions and having demonstrable community benefits. There are a range of other criteria we looked at prioritizing, and part of the context here is if we do an open call for projects within the city, I can just acknowledge that there will be hundreds of projects. The city is not short of climate planners that have been working on these issues, but the objective here was to tease out, for some of the precisely same reasons, projects that were in effect shovel ready, implementation ready, right there, and that was something we absolutely considered and highly considered and evaluated as part of our working through this. And core to this connection is, I just want to acknowledge this. One, from the steadfast, and it is our origin story, and as PCEF being originated from the community, we've always been about investing in the community and thinking through how do we strategically do it, how do we build that capacity. And yet our charge has certainly been about our priority populations. It is about investing in climate action projects that support environmental justice, social, economic, environmental benefits for all Portlanders, including the development of a well-trained and diverse workforce and contractor pool. And so this is part of our code. And so it's just to speak to the fact, and I know the conversation last week spoke to, community, and it is important we articulate clearly what do we mean by, is this something that supports the community at large and maybe a more universal benefit program but it in particular is supportive towards lower income households that may not be able to stand certain bill increases, but it's supporting everyone as a whole, versus those that are more direct targeted beneficiaries focused on individual households. I will acknowledge that a climate investment plan was certainly focused on primarily directly targeting benefits. And so we were looking at individual households, individual businesses, and so forth, whereas as part of the city and the city's, and I think some of the commenters spoke to it, the city is going inherently, it's going to, when it's looking at tree canopy, it is looking at the city as a whole. And so, we consider those, but I just want to name, you will be seeing more broader community benefits and still some targeted in these. And so I think what I'd like to do is I'm going to check. I think our director is here, and maybe what I want to scroll back to, Paul, at this point is actually roll back to the budget slide for Donnie to share a little bit about the budget slide. But you know, I do want to name that, and I'm missing it here. It's somewhere in a slide here. Okay, here, this is the slide before I turn it to Director Oliveira. Ultimately, for you all in terms of your decision making, you know, you have a meeting on Friday, hoping you get to a decision there. The committee can approve, can modify, can reject the proposals. If you're thinking about modifying proposals, you can modify them to whether they're specific outcomes, accountability measures you all want to see. Subsequent to that, the council can accept, amend, or reject your recommendations. And then I think the conversation that, you know, certainly given that we're here now and as imperfect as this process is, we're hoping to tease out is sooner than later, what is the process and allocation for the second set of proposals and future additional funds look like? Given that we were caught flat-footed in this moment, and yet, given the comments you all have shared, what does it look like to plan, to project, to expect when future additional funds rise? How are we approaching that? How are we ready? How are we not caught in this position? And so I think that's sort of, Paul, I think there's certainly some nuance, and I think that's the conversation we expect to get into as we go through each of the sets of proposals. But I want to turn it back to Don before we're moving that, just to give some context on the budget, where this ultimately fits and sits within the budget, because it's an important overlap that we can't ignore. And I'll turn it to Donnie. Let me know if you're here, but I think you're here with us, and I'll swing back to that slide.
Thanks, Sam. I am here.
All right, Donnie, this is the context that I wanted to, I gave the heads up to the committee around just acknowledging that this moment that we had this surplus also came into this moment where the city was facing significant budget shortfalls. And so I wanted for the committee just to kind of weave in the budget timelines we're working with and how this all interacts together.
Thanks, Sam. Good evening. I appreciate the time, and I want to just acknowledge that you all have put in so much time already, and this is, added meetings and in a process that's not ideal and not in alignment with how the committee's existed and functioned to date. Excuse me. The timing of how this has all played out is not been in any way shaped by the PCEF staff or our intention of how we thought the funding would go for the program. In fact, I alluded to this last meeting, but I'll say it again. When you all were working through the CIP process with engagement with community partners, we were targeting $750 million because that's what we thought we were working with. And then about 2 weeks after council adopted the CIP, we found out our forecasts were substantially off. And independent of that process, you've probably seen this in the press, but several of the city's bureaus have been experiencing legitimate funding, cliffs, both predicted and some unpredicted. And independent of PCEF and the fund, what we've experienced as a city is how to solve for a variety of deep cuts or potential deep cuts, but also the fact that we're changing the form of government and there are fiscal implications that we weren't anticipating. Largely speaking, when we set out on this process, once we understood there was more funds generated in the revenue than anticipated, we always kept in mind that if PCEF was going to fund bureau work, it had to be not to just fill a gap that was being created by a shortfall, but there had to be legitimate, climate benefits, community benefits. And as a reminder, and it was legitimately unfair for us, and talking about myself in this particular case, to ask our bureau partners to present to you very complex programs in 5 to 7 minutes. But the reality was we really asked them to highlight the things that they thought, and then, and PCEF staff sort of, looked at as well and analyzed that fit inside the eligibility of the fund. That was the target, because what we were solving for wasn't to make up for the shortfall, but it was really to ensure that there was no additional burdens on the city's general fund. And what I mean by that is the cost burdens that the city is experiencing aren't being funded by PCEF. So when we talk about the funding cliff that, you know, the Bureau of Development Services is experiencing, PCEF isn't funding that. The cost of the new form of government, PCEF isn't funding that. Whether it be overtime, you know, costs in the public safety bureaus, PCEF isn't funding that. But what we're looking at are programs within the bureaus that have climate benefits and community benefits, but also we think are additive to what we're looking for in terms of climate adaptation, mitigation, and potentially sequestration. This was all happening so fast. And one of the things I want to acknowledge is that last week when our colleagues presented, one of the things we heard afterwards, and this is still true today, is that feedback that you all have on how to strengthen the programs that were presented is welcomed. I think one of the benefits of the Clean Energy Fund is that you get to shape and help us strengthen how we deliver our services as a city, but also fundamentally PCEF has values and sort of intentionality that strengthens how we do our climate work. And I think the bureaus are sincerely, actually, I know that the bureaus are sincerely interested in sharing in that vision. I know that the process has been problematic, and in the sense that we haven't had a chance to do a deep dive as we would with other systems, but we also are working in a system of a bureaucracy. PCEF's part of a bureaucracy, and now we're functioning within the budget process. So I know the question was asked last week, like, why are we moving so fast? And the truth is, state law requires us to, as a city, to move through certain like milestones. We have a budget submission early in the year, then the mayor proposes a budget, and then the city has to adopt the budget for July 1. And the reason why there's been so much sort of pressure for you all to help us think about how we do this first tranche is because it's directly influencing how the bureaus are budgeting for 24, 25. So the last thing I'll say about this is, yes, you have questions that have legitimate, like, you know, value that we need to acknowledge about each project, and some of them may result in a vote of no, that you're not interested in funding, and I understand that. But I think what I'd offer is, I think a lot of the projects have room to evolve, and I think that should be considered as an opportunity for the fund to influence how our city does work. The last thing I'm going to say, I know there's been conversations about how long to fund the projects. There is a functional reality that it takes time to hire and to train up staff to run a program. So for some of these projects that are launching or growing, we might be stressing or putting like constraints on the project that would actually inhibit its ability to deliver. But in other places, we can probably have that conversation. There's a lot of one-time funding projects that, you know, 2-year funding is probably appropriate. But I'd like to have that conversation with you all in the bureau so we can actually come to that agreement and understanding, because I think there's fairness to that. And there was also a comment that I want to acknowledge about, you know, why 5 years, and is it beyond, is it permanent? And we've been really explicit since day one that the funding was never committed beyond 5 years, much like the CIP itself. It was a 5-year investment, and after that, there was no promise or guarantee of funding. And all that's possibly stressful as well to the bureaus. That was fair and consistent with the CIP. The last thing I'll leave you all with is this: there's resources coming beyond just this initial tranche you're addressing. We're discussing as tranche 2, and there's probably a tranche 3 as the new forecast comes out in the spring. And I would offer that because we didn't have the time in this initial structure of the first tranche, that doesn't mean we can't be better and learn from this and strengthen what the parameters are for how we want to spend those resources going forward, including, you know, inviting back in community ideas. But I would just tell you that there is budget guidance that was putting pressure on the fund to help us solve for, you know, some of these bureau projects. And that is still a consideration that this committee has to hopefully add as part of their calculation how they want to move forward. And I'll stop there.
Paul and Ramfis, if you don't mind, I would like to go to break and then come back and start with your questions, if that works for you.
Fine with me. Donna, you gonna stick around a little bit longer?
Or Donnie, do you prefer to answer questions now? I'll go with your preference.
Tracy, the break's appropriate. You'll have been here longer than I have. I just got in. I'll be back after the break.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll start with you, Paul, and then Ramfis. Sam, are you ready to proceed?
Wait and see if other screens come on. Okay.
All right.
1
I'm
second.
waiting. I'll just wait for Paul.
Yeah.
You get a glass of water and you started without me.
No, we were waiting for you to see that, see you sign on, Paul. So please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. And Donnie, thanks for joining us tonight and offering some context to what's being proposed by the city. So I wanted to go back to something you said, a couple things actually, that you mentioned that you had some projects that had a startup time frame, and that was the reason why multi-year funding might be needed. But at our last meeting, I asked if what the assignment to the bureaus was, and it was to identify existing program areas that fit within this PCEF's mission, and to put these projects forward to reduce pressure on the general fund. And I asked if that was the assignment. I even wrote it out, and the response was yes. So it sounds like there might be some of these though that are new and some that are existing. So moving forward, if you could find a way to have you and your staff identify which ones are new and which ones are existing, I think that would be helpful. And then the other thing I heard you say was there's a third tranche being considered by the city. And I just want to let you know, I don't know if you were on earlier, but we heard from Co-Chair Horst about the need to preserve some of this newly forecasted funding just so we can implement the climate investment plan with the community. And if the city is going to take all of the additional funding, it's reduce our ability to work more proactively with the community to do what was really intended by what the voters wanted, which was and how we implement the climate investment plan. We also, I don't know if you were here earlier, but we heard very convincing testimony from Latino Network about the concerns about the economic forecast. What if it reverses? And if it's the case, then, and the city is already taking, hundreds of millions of dollars for themselves, it puts the city in direct competition with the community for available funding. So I just think there's, I'm just going to put a healthy amount of caution out there about the city considering a third tranche. Is first I heard of it, and I think this is going to be a big issue in the community.
Paul, thank you so much for those questions. Thank you for allowing me to clarify. The one project that stands out that we heard a lot of feedback on, and from the community in the CIP process, but even in prior conversations, is the the tree maintenance programming from parks. And if we were going to adopt that, that's the $100 million for the city to take on ownership of the street tree maintenance. That would be a program that would need ramping up. So that's an example of a project. But you're right. A lot of the programming that was presented had existing capacity. And there are some places I want to acknowledge in PBOT, and I don't want to speak too much without PBOT staff to validate what I'm saying. But in some cases where we hear feedback from community about programs they want to expand, we're talking about expansion. And some of that's in the CIP, but even in their proposals, there was an opportunity for us to grow. Like that's thinking about, safe routes to school infrastructure and et cetera. So I think we can do a better job of communicating the places that would be ramp up. There'd be ramp up challenges if it's just 2-year funding, and there are some places that would really, be fine with a 2-year window of funding because they were either one-time funding or short-term projects. And then the last thing I just want to acknowledge again is that we gave the bureaus a short amount of time to package this for you all. But in truth, some of the projects have been gestating in our city's, programming for a while and have largely just lacked funding to deliver. And I think this is one of the reasons why PCEF exists. I shared this last week, but PCEF, is a valuable fund because it's realizing the vision that communities had about climate investments, And that includes the vision that, you know, city staff have had for how to deliver that as well. And I don't want to minimize the leadership of community, because that's why the fund exists. But I also want to acknowledge that there are staff within the city who have had a similar vision for community benefits in climate action, and they just haven't had their moment to shine and deliver their programming. So I'm speaking for my own bureau in that case. We've had staff at BPS who've had been working on incredible programming in terms of working to co-create policy that need a little resource to deliver that vision. And there's reasons, some good, some not, about why that hasn't happened yet. But at the end of the day, we want to invest in those projects because they're good ideas. And then to speak to that third tranche, I just want to be, you know, transparent. We don't know what the number is, but you know, Peter Holzman last week alluded to another forecast coming in April, and I think it's reasonable to plan that we may be told that our current forecast is short of what the projected fund is going to be, and to the point of what if the fund goes down, if people believe, you know, that Amazon and Microsoft, Apple, etc., Tesla are going to somehow hit a financial cliff, and all those resources are going to go back into our community. I think that would be a win, right? I mean, part of the reason why PCEF is growing so much is because these corporate interests are seeing unprecedented revenues. And if we were able to shift those dollars back into our community, direct small businesses, there would be a direct benefit as well. So yes, it's true that there's a non-zero chance that Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Apple see a funding cliff of their own, and that would impact PCEF. But that's not the prevailing understanding.
So just a quick response. So, well, there might be more funding in the future, but just because there's more funding in the future, I don't think it's, my opinion, wise public policy to carve out all of that for the city when we haven't even had a chance to talk to the community yet about what they could possibly do. And to date, we've given them limits. We haven't even talked about increasing those limits and what the community possibly could do as well. And so we heard in this testimony, also written testimony, that they wanted to be given a chance. And so the city jumping ahead for a third so soon, when we're barely even scratching the surface on the first tranche, is I can't be the only one that would be concerned by that. So I just a word of caution about proposing a third tranche.
I'll quickly respond to that, Paul, to say it's and I shared this with the co-chairs. Our hope is that, and my hope is that actually, I'll own it for myself, that after this first tranche, the committee can set clear parameters on how the second tranche and the third tranche is framed. So I know Commissioner Rubio had some ideas for how that second tranche should be funded. She had housing and clean industry. Maybe that's not what the committee wants. Maybe the committee wants community-based projects, right? And that's appropriate that you all to provide that feedback. But for this particular tranche, we feel like there's enough detail and concrete information to say that this is worthy of this committee's recommendation. If this committee would like to tell Commissioner Rubio how to spend tranche 2 and the potential tranche 3, you all should do that. I'd recommend that if that's what you want to do.
Thank you.
Brand Face.
Hey, my apologies, got kiddos here. Apparently I'm missing the Blazer game right now. So you know where my loyalties are. It's right here talking about PCEF. Who cares about the Dame reunion here? Thank you. Appreciate, I think, this dialogue. And thank you, Sam. I think on just the presentation on just the background, methodology, the climate, energy, emergency plan. You know, I think I share some of the concerns, Paul, that you've raised on this. Additionally, you know, looking through here on what's up on the screen in terms of like just this quote here, to invest in climate action projects that support environmental justice, social, economic, and environmental benefits for all Portlanders, including the development of a diverse and well-trained workforce and contractor pool to perform work that reduces or sequesters greenhouse gases. You know, to me, when I see that, setting aside, I think, some of my feelings about whether this process feels rushed, not rushed, whether we've had the chance to review this, whether staff has had the opportunity to review this with bureaus, it's hard not to recognize the role of the city and government in this. You know, in my family, when we were growing up, like, the job in the public sector is a transformative job. And just looking at the plans that have been set forth, whether we're talking about tree planting or the transition of a vehicle fleet, those are going to be lots of jobs, likely union jobs. That's going to require training, a new way of how we think about transitioning the workforce. That's going to be not just a new precedent for just the city, but for the entire state. Like, just the city of Portland's fleet, probably add in Metro, Multnomah County, that's probably near 80% of public fleet. I see, you know, union representative on the call, like, I wonder what the trainings will look like to train, whether it be mechanics, diesel mechanics, into EV or RNG vehicles, whatever the fleet, whatever the technology. That's going to set a precedent for how we train other workers in the space. I hope in the discussion you had, you noted here earlier, Donnie, like, if we have an opportunity to set parameters, set a bar for the city. You know, I think one of the undertones that I think I get a lot from other community groups is there have not been historical inclusion for diverse community members into some of these jobs. You know, for some of the jobs, we've known that some of the diversity are in temporary jobs in the city. Like, how can we do better to uplift, to ensure that there is true diversity in the workforce, especially where we potentially see a clean energy transition here? To me, I would say, hey, PCEF is an opportunity to do that and better partner with community groups that would be a natural pipeline for those jobs, whether they be the organizations that are in this call now or organizations that aren't here. But there is an ecosystem, you know, synergy right now between what's happening with tree planting, with what could happen in regenerative agriculture, what's happening in EV fleets, and the training, the workforce training will have a natural connection to, I think, whatever other community organizations do. I hope that there's a way that we can set some good parameters to ensure that we are not just doing business as usual, but uplifting opportunities for community members. So, you know, Donnie, a workforce person, can encourage us, like, hey, like, I see the opportunity here, but we need to make sure it's not business as usual. Like, there's got to be real opportunities and good partnership with community around the implementation. And I hope labor is a part of those conversations as well. So, you know, and for folks as well, like, I heard earlier from testimony from some of the community groups, like, we might be evaluating or reviewing these programs or setting different parameters than we would for community. I hope we set some precedent here as well for how we think about multi-year funding for community groups. So, not to say it's unprecedented, but, you know, Sam, team, like, you know, I'm looking for you all, like, how do we thoughtfully do this? To my committee members and say, like, hey, I'm a volunteer, you're a volunteer. Like, we're gonna need staff capacity to thoughtfully roll these programs out, whether we're adding it to a CIP component, whether it's going to the city. Like, I think we're gonna need to work together, as well as thinking about our own personal workload on this. And I think whatever route we take, we're gonna need the support of community every step of the way to be involved. Like, I'm just not gonna have the capacity or the technical know-how for what's gonna do that. So I hope that we have the power to set the parameters, whichever way route we go here, that we're bringing community and community groups along for each step of the process. So I hear the concern for a, a 5-year process versus a 2-year process. To this point, we haven't set any parameters for community groups when they set a proposal for us. It would be nice to set these parameters. It would be nice to have an interim review, whether it's a 2-year, 3-year marker, to see how the funds are being thoughtfully spent or not spent. By that time, I might not be on this committee. I probably will have termed out. We will have a new generation of committee members. Hopefully we will have continued leadership from folks here. But I'm starting to grapple with the reality. Hey, some of us are going to naturally term out from our current term. So there's a lot of historical precedent that we will be setting that I understand there'll be anxiety. And we're going to need PCEF staff for every step of the way. But at least what I've heard, what you've laid out, Donnie, here is that sounds like we have a lot of flexibility here. And I hope that's the focus of our conversation on Friday is let's set some parameters and standards, and maybe even reciprocate some of the asks from community that we heard really clearly articulated from some of the regenerative agriculture groups. But I want to take at least an opportunity here to go through line item by line item where folks feel comfortable, not comfortable, and obviously we'll have more information tomorrow. But I think I see the opportunity. I see where it may fit the mission. I understand like the concerns where it's a disbalance of how we've historically evaluated community groups. I hope we can at least set a precedent where we're lifting all boats here. I'll conclude my thoughts there.
Donnie, did you want to respond?
Tracy, I just want to appreciate Ramfi's comments there and acknowledge that this is imperfect, but the thing he said that I really want to just double down on is you all have a chance and a chance. You've been asked to help the bureaus define how these resources are utilized. And I maybe this was lost and I want to acknowledge it. Like we pulled all these directors together last week to talk about their projects in a very short amount of time. But the one thing that they all said afterwards is they want feedback. They want to understand how to strengthen their proposals. And to ensure that we're meeting the PCEF standards, and again acknowledging that this was just a particular tranche, unprecedented additional resources, but there's another bucket of money that you can as a committee say, hey, City of Portland, this is how we think these dollars should be spent, and then there's likely to be another group, another tranche of resources coming out that you can even further structure on how those go. This is not ideal. And I mean this sincerely. I think all climate investment is a good investment for our communities. And I don't, it sounds like we're coming from a bureau director, so I want to acknowledge that, but the bureaus want a chance to show you all in our communities that they give a damn and they want to like deliver. And I think, this is a chance for us to let, hold them accountable to that.
Michael?
Hi, Michael Edenhill here. I currently, am employed in the public sector. And when I first started, I was told that the public sector and the county and city are just a gigantic 50-foot tall concrete wheel that just slowly lumbers along. And to change its direction, change the way it does business, to change its policies and its procedures is a hard thing to do. Mostly you get run over. I I worry that we'll set forward this money, and there'll be lots of good words and good intentions behind it. And the city will proceed to take that money and do business as usual, hiring the same contractors, hiring the same workforce, proceeding down the direction that giant concrete wheel is heading. That it won't change direction. And I mean, I'm not against this funding by any means, except for one part. But you know, I'm 90% behind all this. I do really have a concern, and I hope in 5 years that when the committee comes back together, or in 4 years, and looks at how this money's been spent and how the bureaus have spent it and what they've done with it, and you know what communities it's built wealth in, who it's served, doesn't follow along the path that it's been, you know, for the last 100 years. That has an opportunity to actually really change, and that's all.
D'Angelo?
Hi, thank you for recognizing me. I just want to echo Michael's comments that, I mostly want to echo that when we talk about community, it continues to be a vague concept of what communities we're talking about. So when we're talking about addressing, you know, we're going to have, let me pull this up, we're going to have, you know, an arborist trainee program for people to learn about arborist classifications. You know, who are you engaging with? Who's doing this outreach? You know, where are these targeted approaches? Again, I continue to worry about workforce goals. I continue to worry about, you know, particular numbers being reached. You know, I've seen it where we talk about we want to have a certain number of DBE, disadvantaged business enterprise goals or workforce goals for a project, and it goes to the same groups of DBEs, but only DBEs in name. And historically, the numbers show that. I don't want to see some funding go to these initiatives and then we end up having another project or a tranche of projects that end up like Selwood Bridge, where, you know, when it's all broken down and it's all said and done, there was a lot of DB engagements, but it's really just, you know, the same good old boys club. So I really want to focus and echo Michael's comments that we're going to go down the same path. And, you know, let's say this funding goes into a neighborhood and it's a bike lane, and next thing you know, that neighborhood is no longer the same neighborhood. So just, I want to be very mindful of that.
Donnie, I don't see any more questions. Do you have any final comments before we move on to the next section in the agenda?
Thanks, Tracy, so much. Just a couple of thoughts and reflecting the comments that Michael and D'Angelo shared are consistent with how we've been viewing these resources. And I really want to just name a couple of things. First and foremost, Michael, you're right. Historically, government has been a difficult, ship to turn. I actually think PCEF in of itself is really shaping the paradigm. Through your leadership as a committee, staff thinking about ways of doing business differently. I'm going to be really candid with you all. The first tranche that council greenlit, which was the equitable tree canopy project, required PCEF staff and community and our Parks Bureau to work together to really rethink how Parks was doing our urban plantings, right? And that's a really concrete example of how PCEF funding and staff and community groups came together to help a bureau rethink their business operation, their enterprise. That happened. That's real. That's not a hypothetical. That really happened. Simultaneously, another example, our second tranche was the bureau project to help affordable housing do retrofits. Again, PCEF staff and community partners worked with the Housing Bureau to rethink how we did those investments. Another example of a concrete change. But it hasn't just been PCEF. Throughout these years, maybe behind the scenes, maybe not as public and as virtue signaling as maybe necessary for the clout, other bureaus have been working together with community groups. And when I mean community groups, I'll be really explicit. Black-owned businesses, Indigenous partnerships, nonprofits, people of color, community groups that own businesses. I think about PBOT and doing their contracting. PBOT has led really the city in diversifying contracting. D'Angelo, I think you can speak to that with Raymore's construction working with PBOT on investments and how ensuring they're getting contracting out to co-bid firms like Raymore. I think what I'm saying is that the city is ripe for change, and PCEF is able to provide the funding to help realize that change. We're constrained as a city, and there's reasons for that are beyond PCEF's responsibility, absolutely. But what PCEF can do as a fund is invest in the things that we care about, specifically our communities, specifically the communities that have been burdened most by the climate impacts. And I get this process has been unacceptable, it's not ideal. But we can build in checkpoints through this funding to ensure that if things go sideways, we don't like how they're going, business as usual, as previously mentioned, then we'll cut the funding off. And the bureaus agree to that. This is the beauty of this partnership. The bureaus have come to the table saying, if we can't deliver, take the funding back. And Sam and I have been talking with our budget office about mechanisms to do that. I feel like I'm pleading with you on something, but in truth, I want you all to lead with your values and as a committee make the best recommendation possible. But I feel like that because this process has been so fast and just really like unfortunate, we haven't had a chance to actually dive into these projects and how they bring value to our communities at large, and how that at large investment is actually beneficial to the entire climate movement, because our climate impacts know no geographic boundaries. They don't know neighborhood boundaries. Climate impacts don't track. At this point, they're very real across the board in our region. We have to start adapting for better and for worse. All right, thanks, Tracy.
Paul?
Thank you. We don't have a lot of time, but before we leave the process question, maybe a question to the committee here. Earlier, I had proposed that we approach this as 2 years of funding for projects that we like, and with the exception that those projects that are clearly aligned with PCEF values could be approved for funding for 5 years. And before we get into individual projects, which I think we all have opinions on, I would like to get a pulse from the committee how they feel about a proposal like that, or maybe something similar, a similar approach of some kind. Thank you.
Would anyone committee members like to respond to Paul's comment? Maria?
Thanks everyone for your comments, and Paul for offering that proposal. I think that would be helpful for us to have that conversation where we start to organize some of the components of the proposal as to which ones lean heavy towards PCEF priorities and which ones are less. So starting off with organizing on that spectrum, and then also considering those different time frames or execution of time periods for proposals that are heavier PCEF aligned and then those that are less.
Robin?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. You know, everyone today has said how rushed, how imperfect this whole process has been. And for me, that really committing to a 5-year budget for a process that everyone has said is not perfect, much more room for consideration. It doesn't make sense to fund for 5 years. So I think there's the potential for funding for 5 years, but let's talk about accountability. That's just like the nonprofits that we ask them to submit reports and to make sure they get key milestones. Let's hold the agencies, the bureaus, to the same standards. So I'm in favor of reducing the. I'm definitely not in favor of 5 years, and I'm open to a 2-year cycle.
Faith?
I very much appreciate the sentiment that 5 years feels like a really long time, and that as currently planned, we don't have enough insight into how those monies would be spent and what the future looks like. I don't think that the kind of random 5 years to what feels like an uninformed 2 years is any more responsible allocation of funds. I just don't think we know enough about, or at least I don't yet know enough. I haven't dug deep enough to know why 5 years for these programs or what we would base 2 years on. I don't know what the implication to the proposed programs would be to go to 2 years. So I'm really hesitant to make any blanket adjustments. I'm open to adjustments for us working with bureaus to figure out appropriate timing and appropriate checkpoints. But I don't know that a blanket adjustment is fair to us, fair use of the funds, or fair to the bureaus without knowing much more about the impacts of that.
Megan?
Yeah, and thanks, Paul, for teeing us up for a conversation. Donnie for fielding a lot of our questions. On this specific comment, because it's come up a fair amount, my thoughts on that are somewhat similar to Faith's, but I mean, I see the parallel to 5 years because our role is this is an amendment to our CIP, which is a 5-year plan. So to me, that is a rationale for 5 years, because that's the other thing. Now, I am aware that that does not normally how the city budgets. They do annual fiscal budgets. So it is unusual to like do this. And I do worry that city agencies, it's going to be hard for them to pivot away from PCEF if in 5 years we renew the CIP or do a different CIP and those aren't the projects that make the cut. And I am pretty worried about kind of the precedent we're setting or like expectation setting. So I think no matter what we get to, like, I don't think we're seeing PCEF as the permanent funder for these programs. Hopefully many of them, some of them will be done because they're like capital investments, but some of them are programs that it's going to be very hard. So that's the thing to consider. My thought on the 2-year or 5-year thing is if we have, well, and I really appreciate the call, I think it was Paul or Robin or both you, that we asked for really rigorous reporting from our nonprofits, quarterly reports. We heard a lot about it in some of our public input. And so I think we should have very similar expectations, and hopefully staff have the capacity to evaluate that and flag for us if there are problems. And then, yeah, we should have the same clawback provisions and checkpoints that we do with CBOs. Like it should be a somewhat similar process, maybe changed for the city. Maybe there's audits done or something on a rotating basis of city. So that is something that the funding should come with, like, well, we want this to be spent like how you said it was. And we want to know if there are problems, maybe we can help troubleshoot and brainstorm. As for the 2-year thing, I think if there are any really questionable funding areas that we feel somewhat hesitant, but don't want to strike completely, that might be a way to go. It's tricky because all the projects are so different. Like some of them capital investments, well, it might take them 3 years to spend it, but then it's spent. So there's no like dividing that into 2 versus 5 years. So I think it also gets a little messy down on that one.
Michael?
I'm actually going to say that 5 years for most of these programs seems pretty legit. I think there's some that we need to really look at. I think that for all large investment programs, you're looking at a year of ramp up just to get started. A lot of these are going to take 3 years, like streetlights. That's, you don't do that in 8 months, you don't do that in 10 months, you don't do that in 2 years. Those are things that take a long time to get done. And so I'm not as concerned with the 5 years. I do have concerns, which Dottie alluded to, that we're making that clear that this is not an ongoing in perpetuity fund for the bureaus. But I will say that I am not too concerned about 5 years on most of these. I think it aligns with the CIP. It allows us to like ramp up and ramp down at the same time without adding too much more pressure to the staff around trying to keep separate timelines going for separate projects within multiple bureaus.
Sam?
Yeah, I want to make sure there aren't other committee members that are going to go, but so What I'll say is what we can do is we'll track the conversation as we move into this. And I suspect given where we're at in time, we're going to need to tease out how we follow up on some of these afterwards. But what we can do is we can follow up before our follow-up meeting on Friday and at least give you all more flavor. As Faith alluded to, as Michael alluded to, yeah, some of the proposals can't be, you know, they wouldn't be done if it's not 5 years. I mean, for instance, the city won't take on tree maintenance if it's not 5 years. So there's some of those, and then yes, there are some programs where it is, you know, you can make a year-to-year decision because it is ongoing programming that is otherwise on the cutting, you know, on the chopping block, so to speak. And so I think we can provide some of that context or come into the following meeting on Friday around where there's programming that can work in a 2-year time frame and where programs won't work in that 2-year time frame. So I think we can add that. And then I think that, you know, and this is a function of the timing that we're moving through, but every single one of these programs will have measures and metrics. And, you know, this is certainly, it's, you know, it's not even a chicken or the egg. We're approaching this differently because of the demands of the timeline that have been so unfortunate. But we do, and we are working with bureaus, and we have begun working with bureaus on our existing work around teasing out those outcomes, those performance measures that we expect them to report on annually. And as Donnie alluded to, we're in active conversations around what does that point at the year with our budget office look like where we do pull back funding based on what are their outcomes. And so we're working through those just from the mechanics internally around making sure we have those avenues. And then I think it's worthwhile, I think, and we're happy to structure a follow-on conversation later on where we get we have the bureaus sort of preview what are the measures and metrics and outcomes that they expect their program, they expect to use to report on their programs. So that's something we can certainly follow up and bring back and bring back in front of you all.
Ramfis, you originally had your hand up. Do you still want to share with the committee?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. Additionally, be great, helpful to know. I think one of the things that's probably helpful to know too is what given the items that would be budgeted. I'm assuming these are annual budgets, so these are things that are going to be reported to both the city from a RAC standpoint to city council. So it would be great to know, how does city track progress in the budgets and spending? So we have instituted through staff like reports from grantees. It would be helpful to know what are similar or comparable reports that are going to the city to help inform us. I know the Hybrid Advisory Committee has been interested in identifying ways to add capacity around monitoring and tracking workforce and contracting data to the points that I think were made by Michael and D'Angelo, that we're not just replicating the same concrete wheel. Hopefully we can turn this into a more zippy electric wheel, but I think the idea there is how do we ensure we're moving the needle on contract and workforce equity? It's not business as usual or the same DBE firms as D'Angelo referenced. So that would be helpful to know and help inform us where we could set some additional, I think, parameters around reporting. So in addition to what you're saying, related, Sam, I think that would be helpful, additional context tomorrow if that's possible, or at least by Friday.
Donnie?
Thanks, Tracy. And Ramfis, thank you so much for circling back to some of the workforce components. Because when you all agree to whether it's a year or 2 years or 5 years for these funding allocations, that doesn't mean the money starts being spent. Much like when we do a grant, like you all allocated grants, there's still grants that haven't been, allocated yet. They're still in our coffers and not in the community groups. We are going to have a chance to help set parameters on workforce standards, wage standards, community engagement, if that's appropriate. So I think I think there's still an opportunity, not there absolutely is an opportunity to help the bureaus re-envision their programming, like I said earlier. And secondarily, like it's been alluded to a couple of times, there are programs that are one-time projects that are just going to be one-offs, they're almost capital projects, and those are in and out. And for those programs that they're ongoing, setting milestones and reporting mechanisms is 100% appropriate. And frankly, PCEF is required by the code to do performance audits already. So it's inherent in everything we do, where all the money goes out. We're audited and we look at income, the outcomes of those spending. And as you've seen before, we've been audited already and we're still working on our systems. The next iteration of audits is going to be how the money was spent. So not just the bureaus, but our, and our community groups, but just how we're running the program at large is going to be audited. So the committee will be a part of that. And then just wanted to speak to the nuances of 2 years and 5 years. Absolutely, yes. The city runs an annual budget. Programs take time to ramp up. Is 2 years or 5 years appropriate? How do we manage our community groups? I'm going to get a little like philosophical, maybe emotional as a dad, but we need to start investing in our climate programming now and consistently. And it's going to take all forms of investment, whether it be our nonprofit sector, private sector, even government. We need to start doing the good work now, especially being informed by community wisdom and the benefits to community being front and center. We're willing to do that. PCEF is willing to partner in that double bonus, but I think we're negotiating around the edges on projects that are all good right now. And then for that second tranche and the potential future funding that's going to be there, yes, we'll recalibrate and put better parameters around how we want to go about allocating resources. But I want to just encourage this group to think about that there was a whole bunch of projects that came to us and we actually carved out a bunch that we thought were not appropriate. And what came to you last week were good projects, GHG reducing or sequestering, community benefit centered, and more to be done, right? So thank you for letting me have time today, maybe too much time, but I felt compelled to help further frame how this all went down, because I'm certainly, complicit in this pressure. But I also want to, solve for our challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Donnie. Sam, before we move on to the next agenda item, there's the meeting is scheduled to end at 8:30. We have 2 items on the agenda. How would you like to adjust how we proceed?
I think I'd like to propose that we get through at least some of the discussion on this first, and I suspect we'll only get through a few bureaus. It's probably going to leave a handful of bureaus until Thursday, and then in between now and then, for committee members to specifically flag, so that we can, we're going to come back with information on concerns folks have already raised prior to this. But if there are other ones that we can follow up on, particularly as you're thinking about the 2 years versus the 5 years, I think that's where I'm hearing the conversation revolving around, and we'll do our best. We won't have perfect information, but at least make it through a few bureaus here this evening before 8:30, acknowledging that I don't know that pushing the group till 9 this evening may be the most productive. But I want to turn it to Ramfis and Megan and see if they have any other, they've got thoughts. See what can we do through 8:30 and then follow up via email for Friday.
Yeah, just kind of back to our earlier thought about process. Yeah, maybe moving bureau through bureau, and if we can sort of maybe just quickly go through each person. I don't know, just try to get a quick, I'm okay with this one, or I have some serious questions, like just try to flag that quickly from everybody. And if there are serious questions, that's what we need to hear. If people are like, that sounds pretty good, we don't need to hear much, I don't think. I mean, we just don't have the time. So maybe, I don't know if that's possible to do using our Zoom features, or actually just us in the windows, or if you want to call on each of us. That's what I think, Ramfis. And Sam, if you've already heard a lot about things, we don't know what you heard. necessarily, because a lot of it was emailed or sent separately. So you have to like help us
Yeah.
understand something.
Yeah, what I'd encourage then maybe is then just let's flag concerns as we walk through and let's work through, because I think we'll get caught up early on. So if that works, let's focus on the concerns and let's flag the concerns and let's try to keep the conversation moving. Maybe then, if I'm hearing you, Megan, really capture the concerns and then let's get through the end so we hear the concerns without
Concerns seem the
necessarily trying to
most
workshop.
timely if they need a response by Friday. Yeah.
Okay.
Ramfis, your thoughts?
No, I think I support Megan's proposal. I think if there's a way, whether we go item by item or just focus on where folks have more pause for concern, I think that's better and allows us an ability to sort of problem solve ahead of time and get some more information if needed.
All right, thank you. Sam, turning it over to you.
Okay. And because I have a sense for where the concern may lie, I'm going to skip one slide to keep it to the end. So I'll direct this a little bit. Okay. So what raises concerns for you specifically? Let's start with the Portland Water Bureau. As you all heard, there's really 3 programs here within the Portland Water Bureau side of the house. It's their low income home water leak repair program expansion. It's an existing program expanding their energy efficiency work on their facilities. So this is replacing their heat pump and their controls at their operations facility, and then installing renewable energy on their facilities, both micro hydro at Washington Park and then some solar assessment and expansion of their existing solar.
So again, Sam, to clarify, just from committee members, if there are concerns, to voice them here. Robin?
Aren't there more Water Bureau projects?
There's the hydroelectric side. It's very clear for Water Bureau because they have the hydroelectric project, which is the side, and that's the next slide, Robin. And so what it's the Water Bureau operates their water, and then their hydroelectric it is a separate entity that they operate. So and that's the next slide, but I'm going to skip it for the sake of, I know that I'm going to skip it for the sake of catching the others where we're not sure that there are challenges or concerns.
Okay. Okay, so as for these 3, I asked the question, I think last week, I just don't know. For the low income water leak repair, I mean, conceptually, I'm all for it. I just don't know what the climate impact of that is going to be. I'd like to see some math.
Robin, that's actually, we've got that math and we can follow up with you. And in some ways that math gets even better in the sense that we're going to be installing a filtration plant that's going to use more energy to treat our water here shortly. So we've got that math in terms of the energy used to treat the water and move the water. But we can speak to that in terms of how many emissions reduction associated per gallon of water that's moving through the system.
Okay.
Yep.
Ramfis?
Not a concern. I just want to say, maybe to follow up on Robin's question. My understanding is water waste has a carbon footprint, so efficiency reduces our GHG. No, I was going to say, and this might be true for other projects. Just flagging here, like it'd be nice, regardless where we are in this decision on this, it would be nice, to involve committee members, maybe to do sort of a road trip or tour, get a better understanding, looking at these, hearing from project managers or bureau directors, like physically see these. So might help us down the road. So
noted. Okay, Robin, I'm going to skip the next slide because we're already tracking some, but I want to make sure we get through the others and come back to it. Okay, so we'll come back to this one. Let's talk about Bureau of Environmental Services. There's got 3 buckets of programming focused on their watershed natural areas work, their stormwater system work, and their green infrastructure, and then their work on planting private property trees.
Robin?
Kind of the same thing for the first two, the math, the greenhouse gas math. Yeah, same thing.
Doable. It's a question we have out to them, so that's great. Okay.
D'Angelo?
Thank you. For me, for planting trees is fine, but I would like to know more about the follow-up to making sure that those trees actually remain healthy and what the benefits with that would be.
Paul?
I just wanted to appreciate Robin's repeated comments, and maybe we can just make this a column or a row that we evaluate for all the projects as what is the carbon footprint that's affected. Thank you.
Let me move us to our next bureau then. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, D'Angelo. This is the Portland Housing Bureau's effort, and this is building on some of their work that they've done in small part with us, but it is their preservation work. So Portland Housing Bureau, has historically most recently been focused on building new and redeveloping and doing major redevelopments of affordable housing. Most recently, they've started going back, and this is work they've done in the past where they're focused on preservation of existing affordable housing. And this is taking and leveraging $10 million a year of PCEF resources to preserve existing affordable housing by investing in the energy efficiency and renewable energy upgrades to the tune of $10 million per year for 4 years. And so generally speaking, this is about both when we talk about preserving existing affordable housing where it needs an investment in some instances to extend the affordability covenants because it may be rolling off and it may, a lot of times they're funded with tax equity investments that have certain tenure on their affordability.
Robin?
So in the CIP, there's a lot of money going to THC. This is different, right? That's mostly new construction, redevelopment. This is all existing kind of retrofit, that type of stuff, correct?
Correct, exactly. The existing strategic program $160 million allocation we have them is focused on new and major redevelopments, which we effectively consider new. I mean, these are oftentimes gut renovations, but that's what their focus is. And that's been really that work has been really aligned with a lot of the public funding we had from the Metro Housing Bond resources and the Portland Housing Bond resources, and making sure we could add on to those projects, those new projects that are being developed, that are actively being spent down. This is about going back and for existing affordable units, putting out funding so that we can extend and preserve their affordability and update them as part of the process.
Megan?
So these will be 30 years. These units will be 30 years plus. Yeah, sorry.
Sam, state that again. I interrupted you.
These units in many instances will be 30 years plus in terms of age of units. And so they will have been sitting, there will be units that'll be ripe for improvement and investment.
Megan?
Yeah, I see on surface, a complete nexus. So it's not that, it's more just because we only saw public comment so quickly before the meeting. I haven't had a chance to really synthesize, but we heard from leaders in the affordable housing world, and I'm just trying to sift through. So I don't know, Sam, if you can synthesize with their comments. I think, I just want to make sure this program is responsive to what the community is seeing as the need. And I can't tell from trying to skim the 3 or 4 letters we got about housing and remember the verbal comments, but are we missing anything in this bucket from what we're hearing from community or in this approach?
I think I might turn it to see what Faith has to say first, and I'll chime in.
Faith?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question, Sam, but to your point, Megan, yes, we did receive public comment. I scanned it during our 10-minute break, and that was all in favor of this funding allocation or the request from Portland Housing Bureau. So absolutely, preservation is a big issue, and to the extent that we can add some dollars to preserve the affordability so that it doesn't become investment owned property into lots of short-term rentals or for lower or higher income rentals. I think it's a really good plan. I had a lot of confusion last week when the interim bureau director was explaining what this program was as compared to our SP1. But now this is really helpful and clear. So my question, Sam, and Megan, please just go ahead and ask questions on that. But my question to you, Sam, was what does that last sentence mean on this slide?
Thank you. So yes, so this is where the confusion is at. We did purpose some of the resources on a pilot basis for in 2023, Portland Housing Bureau and several others, they haven't gone out with they went out with a preservation request for interest. And as part of that, they received 7 applications, and all of them, they requested PCEF resources for that NOFA. And so that was where we did support some of those projects as part of SP1. And it was sort of, there's a small pool of resources found to do that. And there is where we were like, there's a lot more need here. Let's talk about making this into a program. So, I wanted to hold off on confusion, but as part of strategic program 1, we did support and support some of these projects, which was came out of a small set aside of resources that PHB released late last year.
And the only comment I would make to that is I have no doubt at all that there's a need for preservation, and we could get exact numbers. Like there are people that know those numbers, like Rob Prash, who wrote a comment, or wrote a letter. And so I don't think the Housing Bureau needs to be, I'm sure they're not guessing, and they don't need to guess because we would all know exactly what those numbers are. I don't have them off the top of my head, but one can easily access that.
Yeah, that's correct. I think what I'll just say here is there's a substantial need, and there's an absolutely substantial need, and a lot of this work comes down to figuring out how we're pairing it with other resources to figure out how we go deeper after the deferred maintenance. And so there is still work to be done here to better tease this out, but agree with the comments that the need is there.
Megan.
Yeah, I have a comment to this, and then I actually missed a comment from the past Bureau, and my comments are generally supportive of these funding areas. It's just for the sake of Donnie saying that the bureaus are open to us improving them, or just making sure that maybe they meant this is clear. But to Faith's point, I guess I was assuming, and I would like this to be clarified and confirmed, that all of the housing related efforts we do will always follow the agreements we made around the 7 to 9 year, although these are permanently protected affordable housing is my understanding. So that's kind of one question. I just assumed because that was the discussion, we had a lengthy discussion about that for past PCEF funding, housing related, like a 7-year no lease, raising rent, and then blah, blah, like there were parameters. So I'm assuming that these would also follow those same parameters. Maybe I'll stop with that one. I do have another comment, but it's not about housing.
Correct. In fact, these will have longer affordability covenants than what we had within the climate investment plan, which was targeting market rate affordable housing. So these will have longer covenants. I'd have to follow up with you to get the exact number, but they will have much longer affordability covenants to them.
Yeah, and then my other question, and Donnie, maybe you're trying to answer some past things, but the other ones are, and I'm inspired by Mirabay's comment in the chat box, but it is one, I was actually trying to work to pull up the slides from last time because I thought I remembered them talking to it. And then today the slide wasn't clear, but both to the leaky pipe one and to the tree planting one, but also just generally across all of our projects where there's like site specific or property owner specific, community specific. I am under the assumption, and it's referenced sometimes, but not always equally, that these are going to be prioritizing PCEF priority community areas, geographies, and or specific communities. So any of those tree planting efforts, while yes, private landowners, I believe I remember them saying low income homeowners specifically were the target. But I don't see that referenced again on the slides. And so, but I'm assuming anything we do is always prioritizing when it's prioritizing specific communities to our PCEF priority communities. I'm saying nodding. And then just comments on the leaky pipe one and tree come up, although I think this is probably true for a lot of them. I don't know that we're doing rigorous cost efficiency checks on these. Like, I think I remember being a little bit astonished about how much it costs to do stuff through the city, much more than we ask our, like, we don't let our nonprofits spend that amount of money. So And I get things through the city, unionized contracts and things are expensive. And I also am fully on board with 5-year tree maintenance. Getting the trees to survive is the goal. But and same with the pipe fixing, it was a bit like sticker shock seeing how much things cost. But so I would love some reassurance that cost efficiency is, I mean, I know there's trade-offs when we do things well and right. Cost efficiency is definitely not the only measure, but I think we should be attentive to it. So I had a couple things packed in there.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So I'll try to hit these in a random order. Acknowledging just really quickly on the Housing Bureau projects. One of the benefits of us having that first bite at the apple with the Housing Bureau to think about, rehabs is that we got to see a longer term investment strategy with them. And to offer Michael Bunacore, as interim director, a little bit of grace. He stepped in to speak to these things at the very last minute because his staff that would normally speak to them has since left the Bureau. So he probably wasn't as informed as he could have been, but speaking to Sam's comments, we feel like this is a really strong investment long-term for affordable housing. So moving backwards on the tree planting, tomorrow, actually, at City Council, we're having a work session about, you may have heard about this, about the sort of the unification of natural resource management within the city. And so what's likely to happen, I'm jumping way out in front of any conversation or process, is that all tree maintenance systems may ultimately be co-located in one entity, whether it's in parks or some other entities still to be determined. But when we think about the private tree investment that was alluded to in the last slide, and our right-of-way investments and our parks investments, we'll be able to do like a full citywide analysis on our urban forest and our urban canopy and look towards and prioritizing those areas that need it most because of heat island, urban heat island, or just historically underserved in terms of our tree investments. Long story short, absolutely prioritizing our neighborhoods and communities that have been lacking that investment, and then the subsequent maintenance of it is going to be appropriate. And then on the cost effectiveness of the Water Bureau, completely valid concern, and much like we've alluded to, like we do with all of our funding and grants, setting key metrics and outcomes will be a part of the IAs that we do with the bureaus. So we say, okay, Water Bureau, you're getting X amount of dollars annually. This is our key indicators and our expectations. We do that with all our grantees, and that is the expectation that we're going to do with the bureaus as well. And they're fully aware of that and open to, again, recommendations from the committee on how to ensure that we're, aligned with community priorities.
Ramfis?
Thanks, Donnie. Not to counter you, Megan, there, but I would hope our North Star is quality installation versus just the metric of cost efficiency, especially when we're talking about like, we want to ensure like if we're installing these, whether they be a low income housing or any residential homeowner, like quality installation, the thing that outlives the installation for 3, 4, 5 years versus 1 year, I think outperforms just the cost effectiveness model that can sometimes have negative consequences. And I think we've kind of seen that play out in other areas, but I know that's not what you meant, but I just wanted to kind of jump on that point. Sorry, Sam.
Sam?
Gonna move us to the next one. All right, PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation. And folks, I know we've got a minute here. I'm wondering, so I suspect where some of the hiccups may be, I'm wondering if we can spare another 10 minutes here and see how far we can get. Streetcar replacement. This is part of the streetcar fleet is aging and is in dire need of replacement. We've got our active transportation operations. This is the sweeping and maintenance of 400 miles of bike lanes 6 times per year. Small active transportation capital investment program. This is about funding small capital projects focused on biking and walking. This is supporting some of PBOT's core planning work around the in-motion plans, North Portland in-motion plan and Southeast in the Southeast in-motion plan. Their community programming, education, encouragement is about activating our active transportation and supporting that use of that transportation, and then funding the LED streetlight conversion. And so those are the 5 projects here in this bucket.
Paul?
Well, just a quick question, is the LED streetlights program, is that existing? Is it ramping up? It's just such a large amount of funding. Just a quick background on it, please.
It's existing and continuing. It's the continued replacement. There are large swaths of the city where we still need to continue. It's an ongoing program where we need to continue replacing street lights and converting them to LEDs, which obviously save costs long term in terms of operational costs, and then all sorts of other environmental benefits there.
Thank you.
Robin?
Yeah, about the streetcar capital replacement, I'm wondering if there is a co-benefit that can be offered. You know, if the Bureau is not picking up the cost of the capital cost of replacing streetcars, their cost burden is reduced. And you know, if this is, you know, PCEF funds that are coming, you know, to cover this, what is there a benefit, right? Is there something that can be returned to community? And I'm not necessarily suggesting free fares because I know that's a loaded topic, but something else. And I'm not a transportation person, but we're covering the cost, right? That's going to relieve a cost burden, and can something be returned to the public? And I don't expect an answer here. That's just a bigger question.
Megan?
Yeah, you know, I see a lot of alignment for these transportation projects. I think the LED one, I think is, as I understand it, it's more of one of those general community benefits ones. Yes, it will support our priority communities, but there's also, it makes sense when you're doing that to do a citywide rollout. So many people will benefit. So I'm just clarifying that from you all. And then another thing is, you know, some of these seem like there's a lot of overlap with the strategic program, like that. I hope that as bureaus get other PCEF money from strategic programs, that there's like really thought put into like coordinated implementation. So my transportation wallet feels like it ought to be part of this community programming, education, encouragement. That hopes, I'm assuming PBOT's being very coordinated about all these spending things, but I know we funded some related programs in our CIP.
That's just to answer that quickly. Yes, that's absolutely correct. We are in, and it's different groups of people in some instances, but we're absolutely talking about how are we making the connections between how we're thinking through the transportation wallets, what is the rollout, the programming, the work with community orgs look like there, and then what are their opportunities to you know, parallel, get synergies around some of the programming we're doing with, whether it's Sunday parkways, safe routes to schools, other work we're doing with community-based organizations. So it's there. It's always making sure we do that better, but that's absolutely core to the conversations we're having with people right now.
Yeah, and the e-bike one, it seems like that would work with a lot of this event. So hopefully part of our funding will help cross-agency or like internal collaboration better than it usually happens. So can you just say about the streetlights, that is true that is a citywide effort, right?
I'm gonna nudge yes, and I'm gonna follow up with you on that with more details on Friday, just to validate and not say anything I'm incorrect with.
And I'm just going to add to the streetlights is that in the state of Oregon, you can no longer buy mercury-based lighting as of next year. It's illegal to even transport it. We're going through a massive push at the county to retrofit LEDs in all our buildings because we can't actually move them from building to building to fix broken fluorescent lights or broken street lights that are mercury vapor or mercury halide. So that has to happen. Otherwise, when they burn out, it's just going to stay dark.
Paul?
Thank you, Michael.
Well, you know, I like all these projects. I just want to point out that the streetlight things is very interesting, but it's 5 sentences is their proposal, and they want 37 million. You'd think that there'd be a little bit more information there about how they plan on implementing it, who they're going to contract with, how they're going to engage community, how it's going to be rolled out. If I received a proposal with 5 sentences for 37 million, I would just reject it. But that's just me.
It would be also interesting to know if they're going to start adding, not just conversion and replacement, but actually adding into dark zones. Because out here in the numbers, we got a lot of streets that are basically unlit.
It's a good question. We'll follow up on this question.
Maria?
just a last note for me on the streetlights. I think it is an interesting program to get more details about, because I know a few years back, PBOT worked on a plan around walking while black. And I know one of the big priorities in that plan was to do better on street lighting. And I wonder if this particular program is responsive to the rollout of that street lighting effort, and if there's other types of community benefits they could elaborate on that shows potentially like how they would roll this out, and if some of those priority neighborhoods and communities, like some of you mentioned, would benefit sooner from this.
Great questions, Maria. Thank you. We'll follow up there too. Okay. I'm going to move us to our Division of Asset Management. And here we heard two proposals really focused on city fleet and the Portland 5. And these specifically was about increasing the city electric vehicles, EV charging infrastructure. Actually, the subline is incorrect. That's a failure in a copy and paste. So let's ignore that. But this is this is in large part, this is substantially scaling up our existing work in updating the city's fleet. And it is $25 million, although there will be a ramp up. $5 million is on average, but that is going to reflect a ramp up in doing that effort. And that is a build out of work and a scale of work that we have not done, despite the fact that we are replacing a city fleet. The second of which is the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. It is supporting part of the roof replacement as well as the cooling tower upgrade to get a more efficient cooling tower. This overall supports the broader Portland 5 ecosystem in our art, in our arts establishment there in helping that collectively function better.
Megan?
I thought D'Angelo's hand go up too. I mean, I asked the presenter, clearly these are the ones probably with the least obvious community benefits because they're city fleet, like just by their definition, they're not like in the community. That said, I see the need for these as just infrastructure investments in the city. It's a bummer that PCEF becomes the place to fund them. So that's my hesitation, but they're valid in terms of their climate work, but just by their very nature, they're not as community oriented. So it's more of a comment. I don't really know that there's much they can do to like change my perception of that, but maybe you can.
I think what I would argue here just collectively is sure. And when we look at the city fleet and the makeup of the city fleet, a good chunk of the city fleet is medium and heavy duty. Half of our emissions come from that fleet. So we are talking some substantially large equipment here that does emit harmful particulate matter and whatnot from diesel vehicles. And we're trying to get better at that with inclusion of renewable fuels, et cetera. But more importantly, this is actually probably fairly substantial in terms of when we look at across this. I would guess that this is going to have the biggest greenhouse gas emissions reductions, given the use of the fleet, the substantial nature of the fleet, the fact that it is constantly driving around and being operated. So it's in some ways, if you look at, some things that have much more community benefits, greenhouse gas emissions are going to be, meaningful, but not quite, and this is going to have more of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions and yes, pollution reduction benefits, but not obviously this is about the city. So you're correct in some of your assertions.
D'Angelo.
I want to kind of echo Megan's statements, but I want to go a little further. Well, I do understand that this is important for the city and in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. My concerns are that feel that this may possibly set a precedent for there be a transition for impacted communities to then transition into electric vehicles, which are not very affordable. I don't see these charging stations impacting or being a net positive to impacted communities because they won't be able to use them. I guess I'm very wary of this one. I see the importance of it, but I just don't see, even with that being said, how this would bode well for people that can't even afford to make that transition as the city demands that more and more.
I think I'm gonna acknowledge that I think Ramphis is gonna catch the points that I missed. So I realize I missed some points, but I trust that Ramphis is gonna bring them up around the workforce benefits that we did not speak to. But Michael, sorry, Tracy.
No, that's fine, Sam. Michael?
So my thoughts on the Arlene Schnitzer. I don't think there's any place more uncomfortable for a person of color to go in the city. It clearly benefits fairly wealthy white people for the most part. I have been to quite a few like black dance company performances there, and let me tell you, it's not a place for people of color, even when it's black dance companies there. So I'm not sure what the community benefit is for Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. It seems like something that could be covered by one of their various patrons. But I guess that's my one. It's only $1 million. It's 2% of this budget. 2%, 0.2%. My math's off. But at the same time, I think that's $1 million that we could throw towards agriculture, towards something else that affects the community a lot more than the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall and who it represents.
Branfees?
Thanks, Tracy. I just kind of, I guess, encourage folks to keep an open mind on the electric vehicle, city vehicle fleet. I think to Sam's point, transitioning medium heavy duty fleet will have a benefit around reducing our GHG. I'd probably would argue the areas or the communities that would most benefit would be the areas that see the highest amount of traffic for that fleet. So I think there's another just kind of consideration. Additionally, we're probably talking about a workforce that's being exposed to those diesel emissions. So those are actively running probably in facilities that aren't the best well ventilated. I have my own questions and concerns with even like, fire truck fleet in buildings that are not well ventilated, but that's the world we live in. We're probably not talking about that kind of transition of fleets yet. Hey, Luca, I'm on a call, buddy. Sorry. So just, want to keep folks in open mind. Again, I think the potential I see in the transition for the workforce that I think would love to get more details on, you're going to have to transition, talk about whether you're training the existing workforce, retraining, or training a new workforce. So that's big question. Would love to get more details on. That seems to be a potential for career pathways, whatever that scenario looks like. We're probably talking about substations being built for the new load capacity. Don't know what that looks like. Those are additional jobs. So probably for every mechanic for at least medium heavy duty, we're probably maybe talking about charging infrastructure. So I see the potential for both the climate impacts, health impacts, and job impacts. It probably is much higher than this initial allocation to do all that work. So this feels like a drip in the bucket to really fully transition the fleet. Obviously, there's technology that needs a transition, but anyway, I'm blabbering. I just want to sort of encouraging folks to keep an open mind on this one, and I would probably point to this one as it's probably better for the committee to see it, like see the fleet, see the structures, see what we're talking about to really truly value what we're talking about here.
Donnie?
Thank you, Tracy. A couple things real quick. I just want to flag for these two. The first on the EVs and the infrastructure. First and foremost, you met Maddie last week. She runs this program that she oversees the division of our maintenance program for the city. Maddie is sincerely at the forefront of really shaping our apprenticeship program to ensure that our workforce is bringing in more modern and climate-centered experience. Specifically, she's been really at the forefront of working with our HR bureau, very bureaucratic here, I'm sorry, on partnering with Portland Community College and PSU on apprenticeship programs, specifically acknowledging women in BIPOC programs. So just acknowledging that. I mean, no promises that that's how we're going to go, but this is an emerging area for the city of Portland, and Maddie's been really, emphasizing the changing workforce. Just speaking to Dylan's comment about, the dynamic of investing in city infrastructure when community still has a gap. There's a larger market dynamic at play here when we do this. Government typically does lead when we talk about like kind of vanguard and although EV isn't cutting edge any longer, but when we do infrastructure, when we build in not just the charging stations, but like the electrical capacity on the grid, we are actually building broader community capacity for EVs. And so I just want to just acknowledge that this is a investment in city infrastructure for cars that are driving around our community. But if you take that away, we're still investing in a market for the city of Portland as an EV epicenter, and that's a big thing. And then completely agreeing with Michael's experience at Arlene Schnitzer. One of the things I want to acknowledge is that investments like this come from the foundation and not from the apparatus. And so money that we are able to offset here, the foundation can put towards their education programs, which are focused on, our Portland's communities and our children. And I just want to acknowledge that this is one of those needs where it seems like it should be funded somewhere else, but it's actually offsetting a cost that goes towards good programming. So we're really just, carving out that space. And Portland Fives has been, if you look at their education program, I don't want to speak to it because I'm not a part of their programming, but they have really been leaning in, and they shared this with us to ensure that our children are really getting to experience a safe place to enjoy the arts. And I think that's something to be spoken to. Just acknowledging that this is one of those moments where it's $1 million, yes, but I think it's really what it's offsetting is the value there, including the climate benefits to the building, don't get me wrong, but there's a general offset benefit.
Sam?
I just want to check in with folks here. We've got parks, BPS, and we've got the hydroelectric project left. Where do folks want to go here? We got, we're 7 minutes past my ask of you all, and I don't know that 13 minutes to going to 9 is going to get us through all that. So just want to check in and see whether folks want to. I mean, I can acknowledge. I know that the hydroelectric project is going to be one where there are going to be flags raised. So we could go there and ask for comments via email related to parks and BPS, or we could go any order. I don't know if anyone has. My suggestion might be to go to the hydroelectric project so that we can tease out what we need to respond back to. But I want to know if folks, based on your prior reading, want to focus on the others. And I'll just flash up parks up right now.
Michael?
I think that we've had some of the same general questions on all of these, like what is the GHG output? Can we get some more metrics on who it's actually affecting? And so I think that could probably be taken across the board for the questions that we need answered for Friday to make decisions. Friday.
Okay. And
Paul?
Thank you. So I'm going to miss the first hour at least of the meeting on Friday. And I wouldn't mind having just a few moments to look at the slide that you have for hydropower. Can we just look at it? So my biggest concern about this project is it's not in the city of Portland. And there are benefits to the city of Portland, but you can make that same argument with any form of commerce. So I think just setting that precedent is a problem. And then obviously I voiced last time in the last meeting that I have big problems with the reserve fund. I mean, that's a foundational issue. Nobody expected this fund to be allowed to sit in somebody's bank account in case they need it. But just that it's the whole project is not in the city of Portland is a problem for me.
Robin?
So Paul brought up the reserve fund, so I feel like it gave me an opening to talk about it. I have strong reservations about that as well. I asked for some financials. I hope they'll get it tomorrow. But absence of that, I can only go with some articles that I found in the Oregonian. about this project, and they've been consistently losing money. This reserve fund is in place to set that up. And I just see this as throwing good money after bad. That's not what PCEF was founded for. I get it. I understand the challenges, and there's a budget gap, but if we fund this, we're just subsidizing a loss. I would be more open to extending them, some type of credit, a line of credit or something like that. That's kind of how reserve funds work. But at the end of the day, whenever this loan would end, at the end of the day, the money comes back to PCEF. It's not just to fund a perpetual loss. So that's my 2 cents. But I'm waiting to hear and see the numbers.
Ramfis?
Kind of echo some of the comments. I could, see the benefits, I could see the cost, but we could debate this. But I guess maybe to Paul's question, I guess I get just kind of curious if city has a legal analysis on whether this fits within the city code here for PCEF around funding projects within Portland city limits. So I don't know if it's even worth debating to Paul's point, if it's even legal, but if there's an analysis, it would be great to hear one.
Well, it would maybe just be easier for us to follow up collectively on Friday on this piece of it, in terms of it is a city asset, but I think we can come back and follow up more fully on this given where we're at in our time. But hearing the comments here on the reserve fund loud and clear, and just a desire for more information.
Donnie?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Yeah, just to add, I think you'll see by Friday some feedback on the first 2. We've heard loud and clear from the committee from last week that the reserve fund's probably a stretch. This was more of a practical GHG sort of solving for dynamic. But based on your guidance and your feedback, we think that's probably one that we'll kind of scale back. I just want to acknowledge that the reason why the first 2 we really want to provide the information you need to understand or to at least have complete information is because Bull Run is such a actually vital and increasingly vital part of our energy grid, and we're sensitive about losing that, frankly, and we want to make sure that the region retains that hydropower, not just for the GHG-free energy it provides, but also for resiliency matters of future energy needs. So hopefully we can provide information that is compelling, but understand the concerns here for sure.
Paul?
Well, I appreciate the importance of the project, but there's important projects in Washington County and Clackamas County, Washington State. So we have to draw the line at some point about this. This fund was meant for the city of Portland, not for outside of the city of Portland. But so I have a problem with all 3 of them. I've said that before, but just want to reiterate that. Thank you.
So Sam, in wrapping up, if you could summarize next steps, and we will be meeting for the public to remind everyone we're meeting Friday 3 to 5 p.m. via Zoom. And for the committee, Sam, what will be next steps for that meeting?
We will be sending you all information from the bureaus and follow-up to our meeting last week tomorrow. I expect that we're going to probably be getting some more information related to your questions this evening, probably Friday or earlier in the day. So we'll be coming into the information, and we'll work to tease out how we share that information to the extent that we're able to get it tomorrow versus closer to your meeting Friday, and making sure we're starting off with that information. But just stay tuned, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and sharing public comments, as well as the committee members, and hope to see everybody on Friday at 3 o'clock. Via Zoom. Take care, all. Ramfis, I hope you can watch some of the game.
I will.
Thanks so much,
Bye, all.
everyone. Take care. See you soon.